highlighted photos of some of the things that we've got. I have a short quiz at the very end. Just to try to make it as interactive as possible. I know it's not easy to make it interactive. So, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Right.
The echo again. But.
Yeah, the echo. Yeah, it's distracting. All right, here we go. All right, a little bit about the history of bird banding. The first record of someone banding a bird actually was royalty in France. I could think King Louis IV, I think, and in 1595 he had one of his prized falconry birds, a peregrine falcon, actually essentially flew away, and it was found like 1,500 miles away in Malta from France, and because he got it back, obviously, or at least got the information back about it, because he had a metal band on the bird. In the United States, the first recorded instance of someone actually banding was John James Audubon, and he had some nesting phoebes over his doorway, one of his buildings, and he was curious. Well, are these the same phoebes coming back every spring? And so he tied a little thread, a silver thread, around the leg of some of the fledglings before they fledged, and then sure enough, the next year, I think at least one, or if not two, of the phoebes in his yard actually had silver threads on them. So that was a record of just sort of an informal, just beginning of what was possible. Then in the early 1900s, the Smithsonian got involved and started creating it, making it more of a scientific process and organizing the system. And then in the 20s, the federal government created a bird banding program. Right now, the bird banding program is housed in the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, and there's a bird banding laboratory, and they are in Patuxent, Maryland, and they're the entity that keeps all the records. So any bird that I band, or any bander bands, we get our bands from the bird banding lab, and they're sent to us. We request different sizes and different amounts, and then we enter it into a database and keep track of our inventory of bands. And then as we band birds and collect the data on the birds, we submit the data back to the banding lab. And so they're the repository for all the birds that have been banded. And so when someone recovers a bird or recovers a band, it is then matched up with the original data. So anyway, that's kind of how it works. Why do we ban birds? I mean, some people, if you've seen it before, some people think, oh, it's, you're stressing the birds out, and it's a horrible thing. But actually, it's in the interest of conservation of the birds, and learning more about the birds so that we can conserve them and actually help them. So we learn things that we can learn through bird banding, things like migratory pathways, where they go, how long it takes them to get there, where they winter, things like that. That's one thing we can learn. We can learn how long they survive. I should put that in the quiz. What's the longest lived banded bird? It's actually an albatross out in, I think, in the Midway Island. It's over 65 years old. And Chandler Robbins, who started the breeding bird survey program, who passed away recently, he was in his 90s. He was the biologist who banded that bird 65 years ago. So it's one way that we learn how long birds live in the wild. Also, we can estimate population sizes of populations based on percentage of banded birds versus unbanded birds. So, and all this information helps us, to understand what's going on with the bird populations, and helped create, the support for creating legislation like the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which was just reauthorized recently, and it was under threat to being weakened. But so that's what protects a lot of these birds, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. All right, so a little bit about my project. I started just with one day, just of a test day of banding in the Hammock Park, just to see, are we even gonna catch anything? And we did catch some, a handful of birds, and it was worth doing. So then we really started in earnest in spring of 2012. And so in addition to the banding, we are also doing bird surveys, and we're trying to document, well, what birds are using this habitat, this 100-acre park. And we band 6 days in the spring and 6 days in the fall. And we chose Sunday mornings because it is a public park, and so there were a lot of dog walkers and bikers and runners and all that. So by going Sunday morning early, it was the least visited time. So the hope was that we would have less interference from the public. So, and then the other objective was to give the city of Dunedin information about this park to help them to better manage it. So, to give you an idea where it's located, we're over on the west coast of Florida. Pinellas County is that peninsula there. See if I can get my little pointer to work. Laser pointer. So this is Pinellas County from Tarpon Springs down to Fort DeSoto. Everybody knows where Fort DeSoto is if you're a birder. This is the city of Tampa over here. So the first place I started banding this is my school, which is just north of Tampa in the town of Lutz. And then this right here is Hammock Park and the city of Dunedin. And then right offshore is Caladesi Island, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So anyway, so those are 3 different locations. So let's talk about the process of banding. Let's see if I can get this to go away. There we go. Sorry about that. Hide the pointer. All right, so this is one of the birds that's more secretive. So oftentimes you don't get to see Kentucky warblers, but they use thick forested habitat. So very early on, we started catching Kentucky warblers during migration. So, so pretty much once you select locations, we select based on where I had seen a lot of birds moving around in the park. We got permission from the city of Dunedin to close one of the trails, and then most of it we ran the nets off of that trail, and then in a couple surrounding areas. And so we set up these nets. If you look closely, they're very hard to see. They're called mist nets, and they're 36 feet long, 12.5 meters long, or 12 meters long and 2.5 meters high. So it's about 10 feet high. So you set up the nets. The goal is to get the nets up and open right at dawn, as close to that as possible. And we started with 10 nets, and we gradually increased the number of nets, and we got up to about 15 nets that we would open. So you open the nets. We check them every 30 minutes. Once we get the nets up and open, we set up the banding station. In later years, we got a little fancier. I think Clearwater Audubon donated a pop-up tent, so made it look more official, other than just a folding table in the woods. And we set up our equipment, and we put up signs too. We were open to the public because it's a public park. So we got a lot of people just kind of curious that were coming by to see what we were doing. So had a lot of equipment, had a lot of resources with us. We had to have field guides and that sort of thing. Make sure we can identify all the birds that we captured. And if you look at these little containers here on the table, these are the containers I use for the bands. So those are actually film containers, and then there's a scale there. And the numbers on the film canisters are the size of the bands. So everything from 0A, which is the smallest band, and largest band I have is a 4, which would fit a pileated woodpecker. If I catch anything larger than a pileated woodpecker, can't band it. All right, just let it go. All right, so as I mentioned, these are the mist nets. The birds fly along. They don't see the nets. They hit the net, and there's a lot of give in the net, and then they fall into what's called the pocket. And the analogy I use is sort of like a big hammock. So they're kind of laying in this hammock. They usually have some of the netting around their feet, maybe their wing, that sort of thing, and they can't get away. This is primarily smaller birds. I mean, I'm targeting birds smaller than a blue jay. Birds blue jay size and bigger, oftentimes they just bounce out of the nets, or they can kind of swim their way out. They don't typically get caught too much. So we check the nets every 30 minutes. And this is a red-eyed vireo that we caught. Then once we get to the nets, we extract the birds. We take the birds out of the net. As we're not talking to the birds. We're just being very quiet, very respectful of the birds, and just trying to minimize the stress as much as possible, and quickly take the birds out. Which this takes years of training to do this well. So I mean, all these people you see in these photos are volunteers that I've trained. Then we put them into these bags. They can breathe through the bags, and it actually calms them down. So what we have, 10, 12, 14 birds there to be processed. So they're just waiting for us to process them. So first thing you have to do, you pull the bird out of the bag. You're like, okay, you need to know what that bird is. If you can't identify that bird, you can't band it, because then the data would be inaccurate or wrong and useless. So this is a prothonotary warbler, and one of our volunteers, photographer, he loved taking pictures of the bird with pictures of the bird. So that's one of his pictures. So this is a prothonotary warbler. So then once you have the bird identified, then you measure its leg to make sure you're putting the right size band on the bird. Too small could hurt the bird. Too large, it could obviously just fall off. So this tool is called a leg gauge that we're using, and I'm holding the bird's leg in between my thumb and forefinger and actually putting the leg in some of the slots just to make sure that I'm putting the right size band on the bird. I do have a reference guide that I use that tells me what size, recommended sizes. So, and I don't know if you can see the bird very well, but that's a worm-eating warbler. So, all right. So once we have the right size band, I pull one band out of those containers of the right size, and then I have to open up the band. And to do that, what I do is on these special pliers here. Oops, sorry. These special pliers have a little pin on the top, and it allows me to open up the band, because the bands come off in a circle. Oh, let's see if you can see that. It's like a circle. And they come on a string of 100 bands. And I just pull one off, and then I need to open it up to make it from a 0 or an O to a C. And so I put the closed band on the pin, open the pliers, and it opens up the band. Then I take the open band, put it into the slot in the pliers. These are called banding pliers. And then I can slide the bird's leg in through the front of the pliers, and then I hold the foot of the bird so that even if it struggles at the last instant, I'm not going to accidentally hurt the bird's leg. So it takes a second, or 2 seconds to put the band around the bird's leg, and then I open up the pliers, take the pliers off. And every band has a unique number on it. And on the inside of the band is actually the website of the bird banding lab and a phone number. So if somebody finds the band, they can actually call that number. And then the individual number is on the band. So once the bird is banded, then we collect as much information about the birds as possible. So one thing that we look for, especially on migratory birds, is what we look at the fat. So if you look closely, right above the arrow, that orange or the light orange color, that is the fat of the bird. The bird stores its fat in a little hollow at the base of the neck or at the top of the breast. And it's called the furcular hollow. And when the bird has migrated hundreds of miles and just arrives in a park, and you catch it, that will be a depression, and it will be hollowed out, and there won't be any orange in it at all. The dark pink is the muscle, the muscle tissue. So as the bird sticks around in an area and feeds, they'll fatten up, getting ready for the next stage of their migration. So when that furcular hollow is filled up, sometimes they also store some of their fat under their wings, the wing pits, if you will, and the lower abdomen. And then the bird is ready to make it in the next stage of its migration. So let's see. I'm trying to find my pointer again. Pointer options. Here you go. All right. So sometimes they'll stash their fat down in this area too. So it's all about symmetry. So if the bird put all fat on one side, obviously it wouldn't fly as well. So there's a scale from 0 to 7 so we just rank it how much fat the bird has. Then the other thing is we try to sex the bird if you can. Some birds you can't. like anything from like a blue jay, catbirds, things like that. You can't tell the males from the females unless it's during the breeding season. As opposed to something like a cardinal, you can tell males from females. So here, what you have to know is you have to know all the different feather tracks, because what you do is you're looking at the feathers to try to determine how old the bird is. So the types of things that we're looking for is the shape of these feathers. These are the primary feathers, and you have your secondary feathers. You have these feathers here, which are called the primary coverts, and these cover the upper portion of the primary feather. And you're looking at how much yellow is on them and the shape of them. Are they pointed or are they rounded? Are they really worn? That's another thing that we look for. And those are all clues to help us determine, well, was that bird born this current year? That's what we call a hatch year bird. And then into the next year, it would be called an after hatch year bird. And there's some birds like woodpeckers that actually retain some feathers. Every time they molt their feathers, they keep one or two from each generation for 4 years. So you can actually age a woodpecker to 3 or 4. But most birds will replace all their flight feathers after their first year. And some, will the males, especially in the springtime, they'll go through a supplemental molt that helps them brighten up their plumage. So here's an example. So I call it being a feather detective, trying to figure out, okay, these are wood thrushes, 2 different wood thrushes, looking at the wing. Again, here are the primaries, here are the primary coverts, secondary coverts, secondaries, that sort of thing. But look here at these are called the greater coverts. See these little buffy tips? That's something that a younger bird would have. And then they have adult feathers right here. So that's what we call molt limit. You're looking for a difference in the feathers. All right, you're looking for 2 generations of feathers, if you will. The feathers that they just hatched with, and then the first molt of feathers. But there's gonna be an inconsistency in the quality of the feathers and some of those things that you're looking for, and it varies from species to species. So it depends on what you're looking at. Here, all these feathers are pretty fresh. They're good quality feathers, and you don't see any of those buffy tips. So, and you don't see any difference in the quality of these feathers here. So this would be an after hatch year bird. So it's at least in its 2nd year, if not older. So that's something that we look for. Now this is an example. Most people would recognize this bird as a blue jay. And this is a young blue jay. These feathers here, these are called the alula feathers. And on an older blue jay, and if I ever catch an older blue jay, I'll try to remember to take this same picture to compare it to. Usually blue jays, you don't catch them when they're older. They're too smart. But the older blue jay will have black lines on these feathers, kind of similar to here. See these black lines here? So you'd have similar black lines here. And you can see little faint lines here right now. But so this is a hatch year bird. It was born that year. Another thing that you can look at with blue jays, and it also is true with birds like the catbird, you can look at the roof of the mouth and what color that is. So younger birds have a flesh-colored or light gray, in the case of the blue jay, roof lining or roof of the mouth. And an older bird, it'll be all black. So that's another quick tip. So that's what we're looking for there. Another measurement that we take is what's called the wing chord measurement. So we don't measure the wing outstretched, we measure it closed. And so we have this special wing ruler that has a 90-degree stop at the end that we put right up against the shoulder joint there, and then we measure it, and sometimes that can actually help you determine whether the bird is male or female. So this might look like in a very unusual picture. This is a clear tube, a plastic tube, and this is the scale. I have a very small digital scale that I use. And this is a Carolina wren, and this takes maybe 2 or 3 seconds. So this is how we weigh the bird. So what we do is we put the container on there empty, we zero the scale, then we put the bird in the container, put it on the scale, and in a couple seconds, we know exactly, this weighed 14.2 grams or whatever it might be. So that's how we weigh the birds. So then most people's favorite part is when we release the birds, and that's where we If there are visitors there or at my school, the students are always very keen to be one of the chosen people to release the bird. So here's that worm-eating warbler that we saw having its leg measured, and you can see here the band right there. Now the bands are made out of aluminum. They're very lightweight. It's a soft metal, and they might weigh 1/10 of a gram. So they're really not going to bother the bird too much. Now with birds like cardinals, grosbeaks, things like that, I had noticed that the birds in our area were starting to take off and bend the aluminum bands because they're very soft. So I upgraded to, now I use stainless steel bands on cardinals and grosbeaks and things like that because it's a stronger metal. So they can't take it off. All right, so some of the results, this is the data sheet that we use. We collect a lot of information about the molt of the bird, the weight of the bird. We age it, we sex it. In some cases, you can't sex it, so you just put it unknown, at least unknown to us. We measure the wing, weight, status, how it was released, the date, time, where it was. LGCS is the school, and the net. So we keep track of what nets we caught the bird in, so we can see which ones are the most productive. So some of the results, this was kind of interesting, just putting a simple bar graph together, the number of birds that we caught by season. And if you notice, the peaks here line up with spring. And the conventional wisdom among the birding community in our area was that, oh, don't bother going birding in the hammock in the spring. You never see anything because, it's better in the fall, was what I was told when I moved here. But Hammock Park is, 1 mile or 2 miles from my house. So it was my local patch. And so when we start banding, lo and behold, we find quite a few birds in the Hammock Park in the spring. And I think it was just mainly people were busy down at Fort DeSoto. So why would you go anywhere else when you have Fort DeSoto nearby? But anyway, you might be wondering why there's no data for 2017. We had a hurricane there, and the entire fall banding season, the park was closed. There were giant trees that were toppled left and right. So the park was a mess. So we weren't able to band that season. All right, so some of the highlights, not to bore you, but this, to me, this is one of the cooler photos here. I should make it bigger, but this is a male summer tanager, and this is what we would call a second-year bird because it has only some red feathers in the wings. See how it's got a few? These are newer feathers here. It molted most of its body plumage, but not all. And the greater coverts here. The primary coverts are old feathers from the previous year and some of the primaries. If this bird was an after second year, so at least 2 years, maybe older than 2 years, it would be entirely red. So that's kind of a neat thing you can see with summer tanagers on the males. So we've banded over 1,100 birds in Hammock Park. And of that, 62 different species. So it's pretty diverse what we captured. And then some of the highlights, we got some grosbeaks, not a lot of grosbeaks because it's a thick wooded hydric hammock. So we got one Blackburnian warbler on a day that was very windy. Normally Blackburnians are way up high in the trees, and our nets, it's hard to get the nets up at the very, very tops of the canopy. So scarlet, summer tanagers, Swainson's warblers were fun. The first, as a birder first, I've been birding for a very, very long time. And I had only seen a handful of Swainson's warblers. And one of our first banding sessions, one of the volunteers brought me one of those bags. She handed it to me and said, "Oh, Jim, I don't know what's in this bag." So that's pretty exciting because you don't know what's in the bag. So sure enough, it was a Swainson's warbler. So that was neat to see. And to me, a highlight is just the people that have volunteered their time to help out. And it's amazed me. I'd never advertised for volunteers. They just found me, and I found professional biologists who were now in management of whatever consulting firm they were at, and they missed being in the field. So I had some extremely talented people. Even had a retired orthopedic surgeon who's really good at extracting birds, and kind of a MacGyver. So also the support of the city of Dunedin, couldn't have done it without them, if they didn't let us do it in the park. And then the local Audubon societies that we have, Clearwater and St. Petersburg Audubon, helped out, chipped in a little bit of money, and came out and supported it for field trips and things. And then the park staff. And then we've had some private donors so this is all a volunteer run, self-funded project. So nobody's getting paid to do this project. So this is probably the most exciting slide. I think I now have in this slide in the show. So I've been banding for probably 20 years. I started in Wisconsin. Actually, I got my laser pointer right up in here in Milwaukee. And down here, banding for 12, 13 years now, or 10, 11 years. And I had banded several thousand birds, never had a bird, one of my banded birds recovered until this past spring. So what happens is somebody finds the band, they get contacted, they contact the banding lab, and then the banding lab matches the data, the number of the band of the discovered bird with the bander, and then they notify the bander, hey, your bird, in this case your gray catbird, was found in Massachusetts June 24th. And that was pretty exciting. So, but the really fun thing was I didn't have just one bird recover. I had two birds recovered in two different parts of the country. So we were banding in December. It was actually during the birding festival in 2019. And it was a very windy, stormy day. And we caught, I think, 80 birds. So that was probably one of our busiest days. And we banded a lot of catbirds and a lot of Swainson's thrushes. And then you release them. You hope you get some information back. So those two birds banded in Dunedin on the same day. One went up here to Massachusetts. And unfortunately, both these birds were found dead. But the person who found the gray catbird is a duck hunter. And he was familiar with larger bands, on ducks. And he noted he'd never seen a band so small, so he knew what to do. So he contacted the banding lab. And then the Swainson's thrush ran into somebody's window, a woman's window there. And actually she had a second Swainson's thrush hit a window the next day. But so you can see how far these birds go. They come through Florida, and we knew that they dispersed, but it's like, well, where do they go? And how far do they go, and all that sort of thing. So that was really, really exciting to get some feedback. So some of the birds, this is a hint as to the number one customer that we have, and that's the gray catbird. So given the type of habitat we're banding in, and the types of nets and how close they are to the ground, we catch a lot of catbirds. We do catch resident birds. It's not like we turn up our noses at non-migratory birds. We band cardinals, blue jays, lots of Carolina wrens and that sort of thing. So, but we do get, a decent number of white-eyed vireos, ovenbirds, which they're one of my favorite warblers, the ovenbirds, and then common yellow throats we get a fair number of. Hooded warblers are a lot of fun to have, especially males and females. We get them both. Indigo buntings, which is kind of a little surprising because the habitat, we have one little patch of a field. We have a couple nets around that. So that's probably why we catch, as many indigo buntings as we did. So, and what else? Carolina wrens, plenty of Carolina wrens around. Wood thrushes, again, makes sense given the habitat that we're banding in. And then we have Swainson's thrushes and blue jays. So they were tied for 10th. So gave them equal billing. So that gives you an idea of just the top 10 lists that of the 62 species that we banned and what are the most commonly caught and banded birds. Here you go, the top 10 list. All right. So one thing that, I knew we'd attract some members of the public and, do some public outreach and education, but it was pretty amazing. The people we attracted from all over, and oftentimes there are days we have more people than birds, which is always stressful because people want to see some birds, and also an opportunity to do some education, which as a teacher, I love doing that. And then people get an up close look at beautiful birds like a male indigo bunting. You'll never get such a close look at birds like this. And then here, one of the volunteers is showing the visitors a again, what I've told you, what to look for, how we can age the bird, and what we're looking for. And then they get a chance to release the bird. So we had a lot of visitors. But after doing this a number of years, it just was a lot of effort. Because it's a public park, we couldn't leave our poles up from week to week. So every week we had to take all the poles down and then put them back up every week. And also, we're putting in a lot of effort, and I was thinking we might want to try a different place that we might capture more birds. So that's what got me to looking around, where else could we band that might be more productive. So I ended up settling on Caladesi Island State Park, which some people were not happy because we're now doing it in a inaccessible place. So you have to take a ferry to get there. This is where it is. I don't know if everyone's familiar or heard of Caladesi, but it's over on the west coast, right south of Honeymoon Island, and it's a barrier island. Well, it was a barrier island. Now it's a peninsula attached to Clearwater Beach a number of years ago, but it's about 350 acres of habitat. And this is right here is where the ferry takes you, and then most people, probably 99% of the visitors to Caladesi, are there for the beach. So they walk across here, and they're on one of the most beautiful beaches in the country, if not certainly the state. But that's not the best. It wasn't the best habitat for banding. So we went searching all around, and this is where we ended up, down in this area. So what we were looking for, a lot of this habitat is pine flatwoods, very well maintained pine flatwoods. They do a lot of prescribed burning, but the migrants are looking for oaks. Oaks are one of the most productive in terms of producing insects. So we looked for oaks, and that's where we found them. And so here it shows you our sort of how we've arranged our nets. There's an old Boy Scout campground here that's no longer used, but there's a pavilion, some picnic tables. So that's where we decided to set up our base. And we located our nets around this one base location, then a little further south down in this area. So we have another cluster of nets down there. This is all mangroves along here, and this is all pine flatwood, so not as many oaks. So again, looking for more oaks, and that's what we found in this area here. It's about 3/4 of a mile walk down to that area. So being on a barrier island right on the coast, we had slightly different research questions, things that we wanted to know about. So what we're looking for, what we're trying to investigate is, how are these migratory birds using the coastline? How are they using these islands? How important are these islands to them during migration? And then how long do they stick around? There's terms in the migratory literature talks about fire escapes and refueling stations based on how long they stay. So in this part of Florida, is it mostly fire escapes, as far as are they just, bailing out when the weather gets bad? Or is it a refueling station where some place that they stay longer? So those are kinds of things that we're looking to learn about. This is my second graph that I was allowed. So this is just a different view of the birds that we've caught. This season was the end of our second year, so 4 seasons. But last spring we lost most of our banding days due to the COVID crisis. The park closed down, so we got in 2 days instead of our usual 6 days of banding. But this fall we were able to band 6 days. So this is what it looks like. This is our walk back to the station here. So you can see all the pines, palmettos, and there's grasses mixed in. Lots of towhees. So we've caught a handful of towhees, ground doves, and things like that. But of course, a different location, different challenges. Logistics of just getting out to the study site. Need a boat, because the ferry, which is one of our supporters and sponsors, they allow us to ride back off the island on the ferry for free. But the first ferry is not until 10 o'clock. And we need to be out there between 6 and 6:30 in the morning before the sun comes up at 7 or so. So getting a boat, and that's where Audubon, Florida came in. They donated a boat they weren't using any longer. So that really helped us out. And volunteer boat owners too. The land management practices that help keep this habitat nice and pristine or in good shape. causes challenges. Our first spring, they had some prescribed burning they did, and they burned up that southern, the cluster of nets to the south. We came, we banded there one Sunday. We left the poles up, but we took all the nets down, and we come back the next week, and they did tell us, oh, by the way, we burned, your area. Well, they did. It was black, so we couldn't catch any birds in that area for probably the rest of that season. So we tried moving the nets a little bit. So that's a challenge. Certainly, the weather's a challenge. If there are small craft advisories, we cancel banding, or if it's just marginal weather, it still might be good for banding. Lots of migrants around, but if we can't get to the island, and certainly can't get off the island, that we have to cancel. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. And then, of course, the pandemic, so you just go with the flow. It's a blip in our data. When you're doing a migratory banding station project, it's most effective when it's long term. So the longer you can band the same systematic way for many, many years, then the data becomes more and more valuable. So some of the things that are exciting about banding, you might have heard of some of the technology that's being used now for tracking not even just migratory birds, but sea turtles and whales and sharks and all sorts of things. So there's a lot of high tech stuff that's available depending on what what species you're studying. This is a geolocator. So this device is put on the back of a bird, usually slightly larger birds than warblers, but it records the location once a day of that bird to pretty decent accuracy. And the trick with this is, though, you have to recapture this bird to take this device off of it the next year. And so typically geolocators are deployed or utilized in the breeding areas with birds that breed in the area. And then they want to know, well, where are the birds going? Where do they winter? Where do they stop along the way? So geolocators can be very valuable tools. But a lot of the birds that we're capturing are migrating through. So, the chances of us recapturing a migrating bird with a geolocator are pretty slim, unless they're a bird that winters here. So these right here are called nanotags. So we have geolocators, we have nanotags and remote receivers. These are much smaller now, and these are really exciting. You can put these on very small birds like warblers, and doesn't affect their survival significantly. And the beauty of the nanotags is, combined with a receiver like this tower here, what are called Modus towers. They use VHF technology, almost like, I think it's similar to what they use at your grocery store with scanners. So the bird flies by within 12 miles of one of these towers, and that tower detects it and actually stores the unique signature of that particular tag, which is registered for a certain bird. So then it's matched up, and the researcher is notified that, hey, you're in this. Let's say if it was on this painted bunting, your painted bunting just flew by Miami yesterday, or what have you. So it's pretty cool technology. And I heard recently there's some scientists who are studying nighthawks, and they put these nanotags on a couple nighthawks, and they were in Montana, trying to figure out, again, where are these birds going? And they got detections in Florida, at some of the towers in Florida. So they had no idea that the birds went around and through Florida to migrate. So that kind of stuff is really exciting. Personally, I would love to have a project where we could utilize some of that technology, but you would need to have a tower. And their towers are sprouting up all over. And the technology was developed in Canada, studying shorebirds. So they were on the coast of Canada, and now all the way along the east coast, all the way down even into Florida, they have Modus towers, so that researchers, so it doesn't just detect your birds, it detects any bird that has a nanotag on it. So it's really neat. And there's cellular tracking technology, which I believe you don't need a specialized tower. I think it can be recorded through cell towers. So that's even more more valuable. So, and there are devices that are satellite transmitters that are solar powered, and they put on larger birds like swallowtail kites and things like that, and they last several years. I know St. Pete Audubon had funded some research by the ARCI, Gina Kent, and those folks, they've been tracking a swallowtail kite all the way down to Brazil. So can't do that with the little birds though. So another thing that's kind of cool, I don't fully understand, is the isotope studies with they can actually collect a feather from a bird in the breeding grounds, and they can do a analysis of the feather, and they can look and they can tell what region of the world that bird was when it grew in the new feather. So where does it winter? And so it might be Brazil, but based on the chemical composition of the feather. So that's pretty interesting too. So you might be wondering, well, why are you doing this? Why am I doing more talks? I didn't usually do too many talks, and something that happened last year, I'm sure you've seen this study, the paper article about how many birds we've lost. 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. They actually now have the technology and the data that they can quantify how many birds we're losing and have lost. I mean, most people have been watching birds for a long time, could tell you that the numbers of birds are going down, but it was all anecdotal and it was qualitative information, not really quantitative. So that was a shock. And then to me personally, this girl over here, Greta from Sweden, the activist, the climate activist, just hearing from a 16-year-old telling us, hey, we need to change quickly, or the planet is in trouble. And I found it very inspiring that a young person would be so bold, but I also felt a little humbled and embarrassed that it takes a 16-year-old to wake us up, but whatever it takes to help. So that motivated me to double down and do even more if I can, expand the project, do more talks, get the word out, whatever is possible. So I always like to put in a little slide about, what can you do, especially in light of how many birds we're losing, how fast. If every single person did even just a few little things, could certainly make a big difference for these migratory birds that we all love. Something as simple as providing water to your landscape. A lot of people put up bird feeders, but most birds don't eat seed, but all birds need water. So they need to bathe, they need to take care of their feathers, and they need to drink. So having water is essential. If it can be moving water, the sound of water really draws the bird in. We added a pondless water feature, like a little waterfall, and it's very relaxing. And I have to tell you, it's a mental health benefit too, especially being locked down last spring. Having a water feature to watch the birds as they come in and listen to was really, really helpful. Nativizing your landscape, going native as much as you can, putting as many Florida native plants as possible. Florida friendly is great. It's drought tolerant and saves water, but a lot of the plants that are considered Florida friendly, not native, and they don't provide much food value to the birds, especially during migration. So if you can go native with your landscape, by all means, and there's lots of resources out there. The Florida Native Plant Society, your local chapter, there's all sorts of resources out there. Another one that might be a little more controversial, get people thinking, is one thing that you could really do to help the birds and all wildlife around you, small wildlife, is keep your cat inside. It's better for your cat, and it's much better for the birds. Certainly would have been better for this hooded warbler that this cat grabbed. And there's all sorts of research on that. If you're interested in reading more about it, there's a gentleman, a PhD from the Smithsonian Institution. He wrote a book called Cat Wars, and it's very, very scientific. Goes through all the data on the diseases, the health risks to cats, and It's really interesting read. So if you're interested, it's called Cat Wars by Peter Mara. And then maybe you can't see this so well, but if you put in 7 simple actions to help birds, I think this is through Audubon Society. And they mentioned these 3 things, but also they mention getting involved in citizen science, participating in Christmas bird counts and other things like that. Actually, one that's interesting is drinking shade-grown coffee. It can actually help the birds' wintering grounds. Because a lot of coffee is actually based on sun-grown. So what they do is they clear cut the rainforest and plant in coffee plants. So that obviously is not very good for the birds. With shade-grown, they keep the canopy and they plant in the understory shade coffee plants that can grow in shade and produce in shade. So if we created more of a demand for that kind of coffee, then maybe there'd be more of an incentive to preserve more habitat in the tropics for these birds. So I mentioned some of the sponsors, the 2 local Audubon societies, Caladesi Island Ferry that helps me out, individual sponsors. So as I mentioned, this is a self-funded project. Just recently, this past year, created an organization I'm calling Florida Avian Conservation, and our mascot bird is the ovenbird. So I would love to be able to put Orange County Audubon Society's chapter on the sponsorship slide. So I'd be open to any and all donations. So it doesn't need to have to be monetary. So if you want to follow the project, I have a blog that tells you, what birds we caught that particular week. I put photos and that sort of thing. So it's just hammockbirdbanding.wordpress.com. I haven't changed it from Hammock Bird Banding to Florida Avian Conservation yet, but I will soon. So that's something you can check out. And I started a little fundraising GoFundMe campaign. So if you're so inclined, you can find it on Jim's Migratory Bird Project. So you can find it there. And also, I'm just putting it out there. I know you guys you're not right next door to us, but if you happen to have an old boat or an ATV or something like that, that would be very beneficial. Right now, the boat we have, as I think I'll show you in a slide later, is pretty small. It only holds 3 passengers, so we have to shuttle back and forth to the island to get volunteers over to the island. So a slightly larger boat would be helpful. And down the road, I would love to partner with someone who has engineering technology expertise, would help us develop a plan to install a Modus tower at Honeymoon Island State Park, maybe even Caladesi Island. That's something that's down the road. Have to thank the volunteers for photographs, taking great pictures. Some of the early slides came from Jessica's presentation on the history of bird banding. And then the volunteers you see in the picture there helping us clear the net lanes. Bert, the gentleman, that's the boat that was donated to us by Audubon Florida and National Audubon from Ann Paul. And it was her first boat. So she said she used it for 30 years. And they had a bigger, better boat now. So her friend Bert there is a retired Navy guy, and he can do everything and anything related to boat maintenance and repairs and all that. So he cleaned it up, fixed it up, and got it running. So it's been a big help. And like I said earlier, it's just been fascinating to see what kind of volunteers have turned up. A lot of young professionals too, college students, people who want to pursue this as a career path, but they need experience. So I've had a handful of young professional biologists who are, interested in getting into bird conservation, but, need a chance to get some experience. So, that's where the educator in me helps out. I'm more than happy to help the next generation of conservation biologists. So, all right. So you guys ready for a quiz? It's tough to make this interactive. I can't see the chat, but if you want, just for your own edification, you can jot down your own answers. And I think at the very end, I have one slide, and maybe Deborah and Terry can help me out and let me know who the first person to answer the last bird correctly. And I have stickers. I can send you a sticker, Florida Avian Conservation sticker, if you get that one right. So, all right. So I try not to go too fast. I know I'm a little over 8 o'clock, but so here's the first bird. This one's pretty easy because the answer is right in front of you, right? All right. The other ones, we won't list the answer until I'll give you a chance to write it down. So the first one's a magnolia warbler. All right, this one's pretty easy. You might be wondering, why in the world is this bird holding on to a Q-tip? Well, I'd rather hold on to the Q-tip than my finger, to be quite honest. So it has just enough give that they won't spit that out. So it gives them something to chew on. But we don't, we send them off without that though. So, all right. So everybody knows this one, right? All right. So everybody's got 100% probably by now. All right. So this one, our most frequently banded bird. Okay. Give you a chance to write it down. All right. If you said great catbird, you got that one right too. So now you're batting 1,000. All right. So this one, if you were paying close attention during the presentation, I mentioned this bird because it's in a different slide. All right. So this one's a male indigo bunting. All right. They're going to get a little more challenging here. All right. So this one actually was in the early part of the program that had picture of the bird's leg being measured. And I think I told you what kind of bird it was. Worm-eating warbler, which are a really neat bird. This one I also mentioned. Boy, this quiz might be too easy for you guys. You'll have to let me know if you think it's too easy. This is a male hooded warbler. You can see where they get the name with the black hood around its head. All right, so here you get 2 for the price of 1. This is one of the many benefits of being able to examine these birds in the hand. Birds that are very similar looking in the field, when you get them right next to each other, you can see the relative body shapes, bill shape, size, the markings. This bird, this is a little tricky. It has an eye ring, but it does have orange and black stripes on the top of his head. So another bird that definitely lives a lot in the forest. And forest birds, if you look closely, it has a much larger eye. And the hooded warbler is another example of that. They are in the dark part of the forest, so they have a larger eye. So here you go. This one is often confused. These two are oftentimes confused. So here you have our mascot bird, the ovenbird. And then this one is one of the water thrushes, the northern water thrush. And a lot of times it gets confusing between the northern and the Louisiana water thrush. One thing to look at is the speckling on the throat and the width and length of the eye stripe, how far back it goes. And then the other things you don't have by having birds in the hand are you don't have behavioral cues or clues like the bobbing of the bird up and down, because water thrushes bob. So, but the northern and the Louisiana water thrush bob differently. So you don't have that as a clue. All right, this one's really pretty neat. This was the mystery bird that one of the volunteers brought to me early in our banding project that she didn't know what it was. So this one has what I guess I'm starting to call the Jimmy Durante of beaks as far as warblers. A very large beak in proportion to the size of the head. This is the Swainson's warbler, which is a very highly sought after bird. It's a very secretive bird, tough to get a look at with binoculars in the field. So again, it's a treat to get it to examine it up close. This one's arguably one of the most beautiful birds that we have in, I don't know, I would say North America, certainly in Florida. So we've only caught one of these, one male, and we've caught a couple of females, young males that are all green. This is a male painted bunting. Sorry, my throat's giving out. All right, 3 for the price of 1. This is, I think, our last one or second to last one. So thrushes can be confusing too. If you can get them right next to each other like this, or in this case on top of each other, you can have the benefit of comparison. So this one here has a much redder back, bold eye ring, large eye. It's big, bold spotting on the chest, and the auricular here has a gray striping. These are much more camouflaged, really. So there's your wood thrush. Then you have two other thrushes. So all three of these are thrushes. You have the gray-cheeked, which lacks the eye ring of this one here. This is very all gray, very drab, very indistinct spotting here. And then you have this buffy eye ring. That's the clue for this one, the Swainson's thrush. And I wish we had had a Veery that day. That would have been nice. The grand slam of thrushes. Well, except for the hermit thrush. But anyway, so that's a neat picture that I enjoy sharing with people. All right, here's the one that whoever gets this one first, correct, and I'm relying on Deborah and Terry to keep track of that. This bird is probably the most exciting bird I've ever caught and banded, because it's a bird I'd never seen in Florida before, and I'd only seen out west. That's a clue. And to be honest, when it was in the net, it was in our canopy net, which is about 20 feet up, and it was right next to a bird that's related to it. I'm giving you some time to answer. It was right next to a summer tanager. So I looked at it, I'm like, oh, this looks like a summer tanager, but it doesn't look like a summer tanager. So, all right. I don't know if I've given you enough time to answer it. Do we have some guesses? Maybe no one's playing. I don't know. So here's the answer. This is a western tanager. So I was shocked. And luckily, I have a friend who works at the Black Swamp Bird Observatory in Ohio. So I called him up, FaceTimed him, and then it turned out they have a banding program there, quite extensive. And they had the master bander there was sitting in the room, and they looked at it and they confirmed what I thought it was. But so you never know what you're going to catch. So some days you catch nothing or very few birds. Some days you catch really exciting things like this. I have had hawks in the net, sharp-shinned hawk once up in Wisconsin. Then occasionally we get red-shouldered hawks, which I don't band. I just want to get them out of the net as fast as possible without injuring myself. So, so this is probably, like I said, the most exciting thing I've ever banded. So anyway, so I don't know if I want to stop. This is a Kentucky warbler. We've caught several of those out on Caladesi. So I'm open to questions.
Does anybody have any questions? I got feedback when I tried to open that up.
Mm-hmm.